All right, so I was thinking this episode we could maybe do a movie. We have not done very many films in this. It's usually TV shows. What do we do? I guess we did that movie Knives Out, and we did the Carry On movie, Carry On Camping.
Oh yes, that was a movie, wasn't it?
Yeah, which is funny on our YouTube page. I think Knives Out is maybe our least popular thing we've ever done. I think just because it's modern, and if someone wants to know about it, there's a million reviews other people have done, although that was a great movie. I'm glad we watched it. And then the Carry On one, it gets a surprising amount of traffic. People just like to reminisce about Carry
I
On.
like that cornball stuff.
Yeah, which speaking of, I mean, this might not be super cornball, but so last week we did the Marty Feldman Comedy Machine, and it's always when I go back and I'm editing these and listening back, and it kind of makes me pick up on stuff I didn't think about at the time or whatever. We were talking about how with Marty Feldman, his real claim to fame, or the way you mostly knew him, was Mel Brooks movies. And we've gone through his really original TV appearance with At Last the 1948 Show, and then his Marty Feldman Comedy Machine. He was like relatively successful and famous, but yeah, it was like his movie stuff later that really spurred things on. And just as I was listening back and editing that, I was like, you know what? I've never seen Young Frankenstein. Like, I've heard of it. It's pretty famous. And I've seen a bunch of Mel Brooks movies. I've seen Blazing Saddles. I think Spaceballs is weird. I realized, I never saw Star Wars when I was a kid. And then on my whole childhood, everyone else loved Star Wars. I finally saw it when I was like 21, and I was really let down. I was like, wow, this is the thing that everyone won't shut up about? And then I realized a little later, I think one of the reasons I don't like Star Wars is because I liked Spaceballs so much as a kid, the Mel Brooks version. So I got because it's got all the Star Wars stuff in it. It's got the Darth Vader guy, it's got the lightsabers, it's got the ships, except it's actually funny and fun to watch. And then you watch actual Star Wars and it's a goddamn drag. I was like, fuck this. So I think Mel Brooks ruined Star Wars for me. But yeah, anyway, all that stuff, I was just like, it's just one of those blind spots. I just never saw Young Frankenstein. So how do you feel about that? You want to watch Young Frankenstein?
Sure, I'll see it again.
But yeah, so I did my little teeny bits of research. So the basics of Young Frankenstein came out in 1974, written by Mel Brooks and Gene Wilder. Wilder had the basic idea for it because he was just thinking about how there's just way too many Frankenstein films. There was 1931's Frankenstein. 1935, there was The Bride of Frankenstein. In 1939, there was Son of Frankenstein. And in 1942, there was The Ghost of Frankenstein. So he was talking to Mel Brooks one day, and he's like, I got an idea for a Frankenstein movie. And Mel Brooks was like, we don't need any more. Like, I'm sure they remember them when they were kids or whatever. Like, really? The Ghost of Frankenstein? But he's like, no, I got this other angle and, like, whatever. And to give it like the sort of feeling of one of those movies, or to give it sort of that throwback feeling, a bunch of the lab equipment in this movie is actually from the 1931 Frankenstein. So that's kind of neat. Just say, if it's around, why not? It won a bunch of awards. This movie did great. And it's funny, money stuff. I feel like we never used to care how much money movies made until the internet. And now that that information is available, now it's how everybody goes like, oh, well, did you see? But the information's there, so this thing had a budget of $3 million and it made $86 million, so...
Good profit.
Yeah, can't argue with that. I remember, though, like, the other side of that. I remember when Scott Pilgrim came out in 2010, and it did kind of bad. It was, like, not even... Man, it was like a Julia Roberts movie that weekend that beat it, and a Sylvester Stallone movie that beat it. And the dude that directed it was saying, like, yeah, okay, sure. It was a little soft opening weekend. It didn't do great in theaters, but it's going to make its money back on DVD. And, like, every movie eventually makes its money back. Back in the day, like, no one remembers what other movies came out the week Ghostbusters came out. Or, like, all these weird details that we have. We just know these movies. And I thought that was an interesting point. However, I'm not immune to it. Because when I saw the number, I'm like, well, I'll mention that. But anyway, Mel Brooks considers this to be by far his finest film, though not necessarily the funniest. Which maybe is because he's not in it that much. I don't know. Maybe he's like, I don't know. Like, this could have been funnier if I was in it. But apparently, him and Gene Wilder wrote the script together. And Wilder was like, this movie's kind of like, could be kind of good. And when you're in the movie, you're always breaking the fourth wall and playing to the camera. How about you just don't be in this one? So Mel Brooks just directed it and did some voice stuff. But yeah, mostly though, yeah, I don't really know a ton about this movie. So just one of those things that, since it's always been on my list of one of these like blind spots to fill in, and since it ties in so well to this Marty Feldman stuff we've been doing, like, hey, two birds with one stone. And yeah, I was kind of thinking we could do the 1-2 punch of if we're going to do Mel Brooks, do this and Spaceballs, but I don't know. I don't know if you really want to watch Spaceballs. But I don't know.
We'll see. Let's get this one under our belt first.
Because I feel like this is probably a much more respectable, like, actual film, where Spaceballs was completely dumb. But, like, I mean, I do feel like Spaceballs has to be a whole different conversation on its own, but, like, because I'm like the odd man out. Everyone is so distraught that I don't like Star Wars. But I really feel like Spaceballs, like, there was a whole plot point in Spaceballs about how about merchandising. Look at this Spaceballs underpants and the Spaceballs whatever. And I was like, yeah, that is how it is. Like, everyone I know has the Star Wars underpants and the Star Wars bed sheets, and I fucking hate it. I'm so sick of Star Wars.
I must have. I mean, I saw that, and I thought I took you kids with me to see it, but maybe you didn't. Maybe it was just Mark and I, because I remember walking home from the theater.
From a Star Wars, you mean?
From Star Wars, the original Star Wars. We saw it on National Access Cinema.
I mean, it must have been, yeah, like a re-release, because it came out in 77?
Yeah, well, it would have been later. Yeah. I thought I had both of you with me, but maybe not. But, you know, you were 6, 7-ish.
Yeah, I feel like I would have remembered that. Yeah, because I definitely did not.
Must have just been him with me.
Yeah, 'cause especially, man, that first Star Wars, too. I mean, they've all got their ups and downs, but it's such a 70s movie. It's so slow and just like, oh my God, they walk across the desert for like 40 goddamn minutes, and it's just Luke Skywalker whining about his fucking... I think power converters. That's a whole different thing.
Maybe that wasn't what we saw. Anyway, whatever.
Yeah, whatever. All right, so Young Frankenstein, 1974.
You know, it's a puzzlement. There's something I've always wanted to ask you about that operation. You know, in the transference part, the monster got part of your wonderful brain. But what did you ever get from him? No! Oh! I don't believe! Oh! Ow! Oh! Oh! Ah, sweet mystery of life! At last I found you!
That was such a dumb ending. Even within, like, the rules of this world, that doesn't make any sense.
It was exceptionally well done, though.
Yeah, oh yeah, that was, like, what I like about that is that it really does feel so similar to those old movies. Like, it's a pretty legitimate Frankenstein movie on its own, you know? Like, I feel like if you cut out the jokes, you would just have one of those old-timey movies, but somewhat upgraded, like with better technology and stuff.
And they just didn't treat it as jokes and a whole lot of one-liners. They, especially Gene Wilder, he really played the straight man all the way through. Like, so it was like they were trying to. I mean, they were obviously spoofing a lot of this stuff, but sometimes when they make spoofs, it's joke after joke after joke. This wasn't. This was a.
Yeah, I feel like it's like a respectful spoof, you know, like you can tell they obviously really liked those old movies and put a ton of work into, like, so many of those, like just the way it was shot and the lighting, you know, like all the times they would show, like when they showed the Frankenstein's monster chained up in the side room or whatever, and just the way the lighting is on his face, like, you know, that wasn't easy to do. You can't just do it by accident. You've got to study the old movie and see how to do it. And I feel like they did that all along. Like, even though they had the set from the old movie, still, like, it would be so much work to, like, because it just felt that way. Like, the way it's shot and the way everything looks. That was, I think, my favorite thing about it. It's like the jokes were all right. They weren't bad. But just the style, the feeling of it was so cool.
Yeah, it was good. It was really good. Much better than I remember it.
And yeah, and like I was saying to you while we were watching it, like, I bet if I did go back and watch the old Frankenstein movie, I would probably like it also. But I bet it would drag a lot more. Like, this, you know, the jokes. What I
remember about seeing that, the one from the 1930s, 31-ish, right. the acting was that, some of these early things that we watched, the acting was very dramatic.
Which obviously Gene Wilder did too.
Yeah,
It's alive!
Yes, he did, but he was spoofing those guys.
Right.
Whereas when you watch the first movie, the one I'm just talking about, I vaguely remember it being very, it was dramatic, but it wasn't the way he was doing drama. He was obviously spoofing the drama, but they would be serious about this. But it was like stage acting, too much, over the top. This wasn't. This was right on. This is good.
And I actually am kind of glad too that at first I found Marty Feldman actually a little bit off-putting, because that little note I told you at the start that I had read that Gene Wilder asked Mel Brooks not to be in the movie because Mel Brooks is always playing to the camera and kind of overdoing it. But that's exactly what Marty Feldman did. He was really like, you can't have a joke without him staring at the camera and accentuating the joke. But then they kind of backed off on that.
Yeah, that second part that we watched, he was more downplayed.
Yeah, because like it's, I mean, yeah, there's all of the jokes were there's not really a lot of subtle jokes. Probably the most subtle one, but I did really like it, is when he's Frankenstein's monster has escaped and he's talking to the little girl, and they're just like throwing flower petals in the well, and then the girl's like, "Oh, we're all out of flowers. What else should we throw in the well?" And the monster just kind of looks at the camera. Like that was a nice little moment. But then, yeah, just because that like over-the-top absurd thing where they go on the teeter-totter and he flings her through her bedroom window back to safety. Yeah, it's like that nice balance of like, it's just silly and kind of dumb, but at the same time, it is that same story and that same feeling of the old movies, but without, the boringness.
And of course, they had to put in the little bit of the song and dance routines and the singing and all that, because these guys, Madeline Kahn especially, is well known for her operatic singing voice. So
I do feel like
she sang a lot.
Yeah, like, and all the putting on the Ritz stuff, I feel like that was just kind of like, let's swerve to King Kong, because that was also, old-timey black and white movie, and that's what that scene felt like.
Yeah,
of like,
and they threw in the Bride of Frankenstein here too.
Right.
He takes her, he's off with her, and he's laying her down in the field, and all of a sudden she has those white stripes in her hair.
And yeah, you got to respect too, like, there's something that's nice about, comedies that aren't trying to be too clever. I kind of respect that when, like, the whole movie ended on a dick joke. And, like, you kind of got to respect that, of just like, fuck it, we don't have to be too clever,
But they didn't have to throw it in your face. It was all just suggested, and well suggested too, just with a roll of the eyes and the...
But yeah, I can definitely...
all you got out of it.
I do feel like that description Mel Brooks gave, I mean, I haven't seen every Mel Brooks movie, but I've seen like half of them, say. And like his description of like, this may not be the funniest one, but it's the best one, does seem right, Because like, I mean, like Spaceballs has way more dumb jokes that made me laugh, but this movie was way more of like a real movie. I guess that's what I would say. Like, it feels like a real movie with just some jokes thrown in. A lot of times comedies, they don't quite feel real. They just are just joking.
And sometimes they just put jokes in and they're just kind of lewd, like Blazing Saddles, and they're sitting around the campfire, and it's just the farting beans. Yeah, that kind of stuff.
And like Blazing Saddles is a good example too of like, it just it didn't have enough actual plot, like the actual movie side. It was like hilarious for the first half hour, and then for the next hour you're like, well, okay, like my joke quota has kind of worn out, and now the movie itself is not really like a real movie, where this, just like you're watching a real movie.
And as we said at the beginning, black and white was definitely the way to go with this.
Yeah.
Because the original Frankenstein movies, of course, are black and white, but if you had had color in that, it would have lost a lot. Because the whole theme is like black and white, good versus evil. There's no gray, there's no color.
Yeah, honestly, I think that's like a weird thing with it's a weird thing, but I wonder if that's one reason why new Frankenstein movies don't work that well. Like I was saying, I watched like one with Daniel Radcliffe in it, and I kind of liked it. I thought it was kind of cool. But yeah, it's like, that's how Frankenstein's supposed to be. It's supposed to be black and white. It's supposed to be torches. It's supposed to be, the background's supposed to be a painting. It's just how it's supposed to look. So yeah, I'm glad I watched it. I'm glad I finally,
Highly recommend it to anybody who wants to have a good old Frankenstein. fright.
Yeah.
It's not a fright. It's not a fright show. There was nothing frightening about it at all.
Although, I mean, I guess mostly, the lighting and the environment or whatever, like there is eerie stuff. But yeah, definitely not. But I wonder, like, would you be scared by the old one? Like, maybe in 1931 you would,
Well,
but
see,
not
that's
now.
the thing. If you watch it like today, or even if you watched it even 20 or 30 years ago, no, you wouldn't have been. But for people who would have seen that in the 1930s and in the early 1930s, the Frankenstein monster was supposed to be a very frightening person. You know, he'd give you nightmares when you went to bed. And of course, in the movie, in the book, he kills people.
Right.
Whereas in this one, he didn't.
Right.
All they do is play some violins, and off he went.
That is funny too. Yeah, just though again with the that they're not afraid to just really be silly about the jokes. Where I think it was Gene Hackman, right, who was the blind guy that he goes and hangs out with. Just a little side scene where Frankenstein meets a blind guy, so this guy doesn't realize he's dealing with a monster. But because he's blind, he's like, "Oh, let me give you something to eat," and he just pours soup on the poor monster's crotch like 3 times. It's just like, I don't know. It's one of those
He
things.
offers him a thing of wine, and he does the cheers and smashes his mug.
Yeah, like it would have been. It's one of those things where I wish I could see what one of their writing sessions was like when they sat down to write this movie, because I bet it was like that balance of like, all right, we got to keep a logical plot thread so that it does feel like one of these old movies and it has an actual flow and everything feels right. But then at the same time, you can't go too far without a dumb joke.
Yeah. And see, by the time this was made in the 1970s, probably everybody, or 90% of everybody who would have seen this, would have known the Frankenstein story.
Right.
If through movies or through reading Mary Shelley's book. But they would have, and they would have been expecting things like, okay, the little girl with the flowers, oh, he's going to throw her in the well, because that's what happened. The blind man, there's fire, and the blind man. What happens in that one? I don't know that he kills the blind man, but the blind man's house burns down, and he's being pursued by these townspeople. The blind man's house burns down, and the blind man is in it. I don't really think the Frankenstein monster does him in, but they believe that he did, because the house burns and the man burns to death. And then, of course, they kill the monster. So everybody would have known that basic story. So, yeah, these guys had to kind of take that basic story and then push it further.
This is making me think, too, I mean, part of this could be just because I worked at a comic store and all my friends were various nerds of different types. But I remember that was one of those things when I was like a teenager, just like, he's not called Frankenstein. Frankenstein's the doctor. He's Frankenstein's monster. It's like, yeah, okay, whatever. If I say Frankenstein, you know what I mean. But I just remember that was...
But I know when I was a kid, I believed that the monster was Frankenstein.
Right.
And it's only when I was in university I read it, and then I said, wait a minute, the doctor is the monster. It's not the human. It's not the monster. But everybody, when I was a kid growing up and we talked about Frankenstein, we saw the movies, you saw things on TV, whatever, everybody believed that the monster was Frankenstein.
And obviously, too, I mean, like, it went through such a, like, originally it was, like, a pretty legitimate thing, but then not only was there, like we were saying, Bride of Frankenstein, Son of Frankenstein, Ghost of Frankenstein, but then you get into, like, I don't know if it was Laurel and Hardy, maybe it was the other ones, Ozzy and whoever, but there was, like, Meet the Mummy or
Oh,
Meet the...
yeah. That was usually Abbott and Costello.
Yeah, that's who it was.
Abbott
yeah.
and Costello meet Frankenstein. Abbott and Costello meet Dracula. They met everybody.
So yeah, at that point, like any of the old, like legitimate story of like, oh, this is a like the coolness of the original story of like, who is the monster, man or monster, and then Frankenstein, like that's all gone. It's all just pop culture.
And when you think about Frankenstein, the movies, everybody, Frankenstein is Boris Karloff.
Right. Yeah.
That's just who it is. Nobody even remembers who played the doctor, but everybody knows who played the monster. And it was, Boris Karloff with the big cork out of the side of his neck.
I love the zipper too. He's got a zipper on his neck. But yeah, it makes sense that everybody just calls the monster Frankenstein because I mean, by the '60s, by the '70s, whatever, it's just a thing that you put on your lunchbox.
Well, yeah, and see, there were movies, a lot of the Hammer movies out of Britain that did Dracula, then did combinations of Dracula meets Frankenstein.
See, that's another thing. Like I've always heard about the Hammer films, and I've never seen one. Maybe that's another thing I should try to dig up because it's just something I feel like I should just have in my little repertoire of things that you hear about these things and people are always referencing them, and then sometimes I just realize, like I did with this, I've never actually seen that. So maybe I will.
But see, certain people became. That's what people knew about those monsters. Yeah, you had Karloff was the Frankenstein monster, Frankenstein monster, whatever you want to call him. You had Peter Cushing was Felsing, the guy that does it.
Van Helsing. Yeah.
Van Helsing, yeah, he's Van Helsing, and Christopher Lee.
That's it. Yeah, right.
Is Dracula. Those three in the 60s, early 70s. They were those characters. Everybody, as soon as she said Christopher Lee, everybody knew. Oh yeah, that's Dracula. Peter Cushing. Oh yeah, he's Van Helsing. and who's the other? Oh, Bela Lugosi.
Oh yeah, of course.
He's Dracula. I mean, he did other movies and things, but he's known for being the early Dracula.
So I guess too. This is I guess I feel like. It's weird talking about Marty Feldman. I just always feel like I'm being slightly mean about him. But because he's the reason that we got here and this whole thing started with Marty Feldman, could there be a better role for him? That's fucking perfect. I'm almost impressed that before this, with all the earlier stuff we watched with Marty Feldman in it, how his physical features and his eyes in particular played into nothing. They just ignored it. He was just a guy, just a comedy guy.
And his eyes, he's definitely wall-eyed, and they're a little buggy. But the earlier things that we saw, they weren't like that.
Yeah, no, I guess that's true. Because here, you had that black cloak, so you only see his big white face, and he's clearly opening his eyes even more.
And they must have put something on his eyes to open them up, to keep them. I don't know how they did it, but, his eyes were always open and very protruding.
Because I feel like it almost would be, maybe things, I guess, were just less politically correct back then, too, but when Mel Brooks dropped him a line, hey, you want to be Igor? I wonder if he's why me? Why did you pick me for Igor? No reason, you're funny. But I assume he was in on, obviously, he's but I guess I'm surprised that his eyes, it's such a novelty thing, the way he looks, but it never was until this point. All of his earlier stuff, he was just the Marty Feldman comedy machine guy, which is kind of, I don't know, I'm impressed, I guess, that the world was. But
what people remember about him are those eyes.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. How do you not? That's always nice too. That's a good sign for something where, because I don't know anything about this, I've never seen it before, I'm I hope we have something to say about it.
We always seem to have something to say.
But that's a good sign, because that means it was interesting.
No, that was much better than I remembered it.
Right.
Than as I remembered it.